Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Seeking unity amidst global turmoil. Nearly 150 world leaders gather in New York for the United Nations General Assembly. With the conflict in Ukraine set to top the agenda at the UNGA, Kyiv says a Russian drone attack has struck its western city of Lviv. Protesters in Libya's city of Derna take to the streets for the first time, angry at the government's failure over deadly floods that killed thousands of people. And India expels a Canadian diplomat, and Canada follows suit as the row over the killing of a Sikh separatist in British Columbia in June escalates. The 78th session of the UN General Assembly is underway, with the climate crisis and the conflict in Ukraine high on the agenda. More than 140 world leaders will speak at the event in New York. The theme of this year's meeting is rebuilding trust and reigniting global solidarity. Brazil's President Lula da Silva has been the first to address the Assembly this morning. US President Joe Biden and Ukraine's President Zelensky will speak later. Well, our correspondent John Tarrett is at UN headquarters in New York. So, John, what's been happening so far?
Well, the most important thing, of course, Robin, is that the weather is vastly better than it was 24 hours ago when we were covered in cloud and rain. It's a beautiful sunny day here today. And the way it goes on the first day of the General Assembly is always the same. The Secretary General speaks, then we hear from the representative of Brazil, and then we hear from the President of the United States. And so it is happening and playing out around us at the moment. Now, the Secretary General, as you know, has a pet issue, which is climate change. And in the past, he has given very, very fiery speeches, certainly last year and the year before, very fiery speeches lambasting all of us on what we need to do in order to try and sort this problem out. Well, he's just finished speaking in the last couple of minutes, and I don't think he was quite as fiery as he might have been, as he has been in the past. But he did say some very interesting things. For example, right at the top, off the bat, the first thing he said was that 9 days ago, all the world's challenges, all of them, coalesced in one awful hellscape. That was the word he used, hellscape. And of course he was talking about Derna in Libya, where those two dams burst after heavy rain. And the Secretary General went on to say that climate change is not just a change in the weather, climate change is changing life on our planet. So you can see that it's a key priority for the Secretary General. The next thing that will happen here, by the way, is the Climate Ambition Summit tomorrow, Wednesday, where they're going to showcase all sorts of things that you can do to try and, keep climate change at bay. Interestingly enough, the Secretary General called on the G7, the big countries, the big economic countries in the world, the big polluters in the world, to take a lead in fighting climate change. He said it's down to those leaders, the G7 and I suppose also the G20 as well. Interesting to note then that President Biden, who we're going to hear from in the next half an hour or so, will be giving that summit tomorrow a miss. He will not be attending. In other words, the Secretary General's message was that the world is a bit upside down at the moment and fragmented and split, and he called on reform of the financial system around the world, which he called dysfunctional, outdated and unjust, and pointed out that Africa pays more a year on debt interest than it does on health care. So that's the Secretary General. We're now, I think, it's such a sunny, bright day today that we can't see the screens now. I think Lula da Silva, the Brazilian president, is speaking at the moment. I'm not entirely sure. You will have a better idea than me, Robin, but let me tell you that this summit now, this GA, is being dominated by Iran and Ukraine after the Iranian and US hostage swap yesterday, which involves $6 billion. We're waiting to hear from President Raisi this afternoon, the Iranian president, and there is hope, and indeed he has already met with the SG. There is some hope, or at least some talk, that maybe that hostage swap will lead to progress on the issue of Iran's nuclear weapons. No guarantees, of course, about that. And the other thing is President Zelensky will be speaking later today as well. Ukraine is likely to dominate. So after Biden speaks, later we'll hear from President Zelensky. Biden will meet him in New York, and then it's just been revealed that President Zelensky will go to the White House on Thursday of this week. And that's important because the Congress is in two minds about whether to provide any more funding for Ukraine, as President Biden wants. So that's the day ahead then. SG spoken. We're waiting for President Biden. We're waiting for President Raisi later today. And obviously, a lot rather depends on what they say in those speeches. Robin, back to you.
John, thank you very much. Our correspondent John Tarrett in New York. The conflict in Ukraine is set to top the agenda at the UN General Assembly. Kyiv says at least one person has been killed in a Russian drone attack on the western city of Lviv, just 50 kilometres from the Polish border. 3 industrial warehouses were set on fire in a wave of strikes that began in the early hours of Tuesday. The city's mayor says a worker was found dead at the scene, with others injured. Lviv's residents have been told to stay indoors or go to air raid shelters amid fears of more attacks. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is meeting security officials in Moscow as his 4-day trip to Russia continues. The Kremlin says the visit underlines the progressive development of its partnership with Beijing. Well, our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova is in Moscow. So, Dasha, what's the latest on Wang Yi's visit?
Well, indeed, after the meetings that the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi had in Moscow with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and with the Russian Secretary of the Security Council, Nikolai Patrushev, the Russian officials have confirmed the plans of the Russian President Vladimir Putin to travel to China for the Belt and Road Forum in October. We understand that the Secretary of the Security Council said Moscow is looking forward to thorough bilateral talks between the Russian President and the Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing. This visit is reconfirming the intentions of these two sides to beef up their further cooperation. We also have heard from Nikolai Patrushev, with whom Wang Yi was meeting on Tuesday, that Russia is committed to the progressive development and strengthening of the relations with Beijing. He also has said that the two powers had a comprehensive partnership and strategic cooperation. Patrushev has also said that the positions and the approaches of both Moscow and Beijing to the fundamental issues in the modern world and key international problems do coincide and are very close, and that was very important for their bilateral relations. He also said that Moscow does support Beijing on the issue of Taiwan. The sides also discussed the joint counteraction to the interference in the internal affairs of other countries. On Monday, the Chinese Foreign Minister had conversations and talks with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and in that one, the side has also discussed the issues of the U.S. interference and the policy of containment, saying that the two countries do share the approach to the idea of countering these anti-Russian and anti-Chinese policies. The issues of Ukraine settlement, Korean Peninsula have also been on the agenda, but of course the two sides are also stressing that the nature of the China-Russia relations have been very, very solid, and the sides are trying to beef up cooperation in a trusting and constructive manner.
Dasha, thank you very much. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Explosions have been heard in Nagorno-Karabakh as Azerbaijan launched what it called anti-terror operations in the breakaway region. Azerbaijan says at least 6 people have been killed in explosions. It's called for the complete withdrawal of Armenian forces from the region. Over 100,000 ethnic Armenians live in Nagorno-Karabakh. Tensions have been rising since December, when Azerbaijan blocked the main corridor linking the enclave to Armenia. There are reports that journalists have been told to leave Libya's eastern city of Derna, a day after hundreds of protesters took to the streets demanding answers for last week's catastrophic floods. Demonstrators gathered in front of a landmark mosque in the city and later set fire to the house of the city's ousted mayor. A quarter of the city was washed away after 2 dams collapsed when a storm struck last week. As many as 20,000 people are feared dead. Protesters say they were not sufficiently warned by government officials and are calling for accountability.
We call for holding all officials accountable and arresting them. Those who were in charge of the city, although they were not qualified. Those who were appointed, despite being rejected by the city's residents.
First of all, we pray that all the martyrs will rest in peace, and I hope this is the end of our catastrophes. We just ask that if there will be any rebuilding efforts, that no Libyan company be ever involved. This is because everyone in Derna, from the head of the municipality to all of the officials, are corrupt. Derna should either be left as it is, or a foreign company should be involved.
It's nearly 2 weeks since a devastating 6.8 magnitude earthquake struck Morocco, killing almost 3,000 people and injuring nearly twice as many. The country is struggling to cope with homes and infrastructure destroyed. The United Nations estimates that over 100,000 children have been affected. Our correspondent Adnan Chouachi reports.
UNICEF estimates from 2022 indicate that almost a third of Morocco's population of approximately 39 million are children. So it's not surprising that so many children have been affected in some way by the earthquake. King Mohammed VI has stepped in to offer Morocco's support to those orphaned by the tragedy, referring to them as wards of the nation.
UNICEF warns that children are always among the most vulnerable in any emergency. The organization also says that many people, including children, are likely to have been displaced from the affected areas.
The psychological torment for these children whose parents have been suddenly taken from them can often be traumatic. Because of this, authorities and non-governmental organizations are looking to get these children whatever assistance they need in coming to terms with their new situation.
Moroccan authorities are helping all victims, but children benefit from a very special status and aid. The children who should be at school are still in shock after the earthquake. Now they need to find hope in life and go back to school. The Mohammed V Foundation is providing counseling and orientation to children.
Children who have lost their parents and relatives, as well as their homes and schools, will now be taken into the care of the state.
This initiative is in partnership with the Education Ministry and all stakeholders to help them gradually resume a normal life in the damaged regions. Our aim is to help these children become psychologically stable.
Many civil society organizations are involved in the ambitious project to provide school supplies to Moroccan children in the most damaged regions of the North African Kingdom.
King Mohammed VI is leading this national effort to provide all children with school bags and supplies. The initiative aims to assist, support and comfort all children in affected areas in Morocco. It's part of many other actions aimed at supporting children in the country.
With schools ruined in affected areas, temporary tented classrooms are being erected. Authorities and NGOs are to equip them with whatever supplies and equipment they need when schooling returns. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Marrakesh, Morocco.
A row between India and Canada has escalated after Delhi expelled a Canadian diplomat in response to a similar action taken by Canada on Monday. This comes hours after India rejected an accusation by Ottawa that it was involved in the killing of a Sikh separatist leader in Canada. Our correspondent Ravinder Bauer reports from Delhi.
Well, allegations and counter-allegations levelled by India and Canada has led to the expulsion of a senior Canadian diplomat. The diplomat was summoned by the Ministry of External Affairs to hand over the order to leave. This development is the latest in the strained relationship between the two nations. On Monday, the Canadian Prime Minister said authorities were investigating credible allegations linking India's agents to the murder of a Sikh separatist leader. Dismissing the allegations as absurd, India asked Canada to crack down on anti-India elements operating in its territory. The Canadian leader had told the House of Commons in an emergency statement on Monday that any involvement of a foreign government in killing of a Canadian citizen was an unacceptable violation of our sovereignty. Indian Foreign Ministry, responding to this, said that the decision reflects the government of India's growing concern at the interference of Canadian diplomats in their internal matters and their involvement in anti-India activities. Trade talks between the two nations has been hit due to the rising tensions. Countries like United States, United Kingdom and Australia have expressed their concerns regarding these rising tensions.
Our correspondent Ravinder Bauer reporting from Delhi. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead.
Join me to find out how Chinese-made drones could revolutionise UK farming and provide a gateway to Western Europe.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans, grey rhinos, and unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our main story. Seeking unity amidst global turmoil. Nearly 150 world leaders gather in New York for the United Nations General Assembly. Well, the United Nations has set sustainable development goals, but Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has warned that there is a long way to go to meet them. Tackling global hunger is one of those goals. Our correspondent Michael Marilia is here to explain. Michael.
Thanks very much, Robin. Now, the United Nations says governments are failing to deal with hunger. It wants to eliminate the problem by 2030, but right now the zero hunger target seems impossible. The UN says 600 million people will face hunger in 2030. That means they won't have enough to eat on a regular or consistent basis. Let's put that in context. Take the current population of the United States, add all the people of Brazil, plus the entire population of Germany, and you have roughly 600 million people. That is the scale of global hunger in 2030. But this isn't just some problem on the horizon. The UN says nearly 150 million children are already suffering from stunting. In other words, they haven't grown normally because they're not getting enough food. Meanwhile, more than 40 million children are wasting. What does that mean? Well, their muscles aren't developing as they should because they're going hungry. The UN says there are several reasons for this crisis. Conflicts have disrupted food supply chains, so-called climate shocks are taking a toll on crops, and sometimes farmers aren't producing as much because they face so many obstacles. All of that means the goal of zero hunger remains just that, a goal. The reality right now is empty plates and ultimately empty stomachs. Robin?
Michael, thank you. Our correspondent, Michael Marilia. Several schools have closed in southeast Australia as an unusually hot spring and high winds have increased the fire risk. Over 60 bushfires have already been reported in the region, a month before the beginning of the official bushfire season. Sydney is sweltering in record temperatures and forecasters are predicting a hotter than average summer ahead. Australia's Weather Bureau says the spring heatwave is part of an El Niño pattern.
I think El Niño means that we've elevated the risk of fire danger and extreme heat in particular in terms of the hazards that we face. As I mentioned earlier, we aren't leading into this summer on the back of extended drought, which somewhat reduces the risk, but we have seen eastern New South Wales dry out quite particularly, and I think there's 61 fires burning in the landscape in New South Wales at the moment. So that just underscores if we continue to dry out the landscape over the next 3 months, and the Bureau will be watching that really closely, then we'll be adjusting our message accordingly in terms of the risk.
The United States' worst auto workers' strike in decades has entered its 5th day. Negotiators say there have been some reasonably productive discussions, but an agreement seems nowhere in sight. CGTN's Hendrik Sybrandy reports.
In Detroit this past weekend, members of the United Auto Workers Union had a loud and clear message for their bosses. It was echoed by a prominent U.S. politician.
It is time for you to end your greed. It is time for you to treat your employees with the respect and dignity they deserve.
Time, they all said, to sit down and negotiate a fair contract. Existing deals for 146,000 workers at Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis car assembly plants expired last Thursday. With no new contracts, nearly 13,000 of them at 3 factories were ordered onto the picket lines in a targeted action.
These 3 units are being called to stand up and walk out on strike at midnight tonight.
The union is demanding a 36% pay increase over 4 years, roughly double what the companies are offering.
No deal! No deal!
Members are also calling for the end of wage tiers and better pension plans for new hires. Pretty reasonable, says President Biden.
Auto companies have seen record profits, including the last few years, because of the extraordinary skill and sacrifices of the UAW workers. Those record profits have not been shared fairly, in my view, with those workers.
Back in 2007, they gave up cost of living raises and made pension concessions to help car makers survive the Great Recession. Now they say it's time for payback, for companies to share some of their big profits. Some argue the COVID-19 pandemic also upset the status quo and convinced many workers they were being taken advantage of.
And when you are in the midst of a crisis where a lot of things that you took for granted have become unraveled, you also recognize that this is an opportunity to make changes, to move yourself forward.
A recent deal between Teamsters and UPS may also have sent a signal to the UAW that strikes pay off.
I think these workers feel that they now have as much bargaining power as they're ever going to have, and so that's why this strike is happening now.
Companies say union proposals are far too expensive, would make car makers less competitive with their non-union rivals, and that their hands can't be tied as they invest for an electric vehicle future. Workers say they're holding firm.
Now it's time. We need a contract. We need one that takes care of the new hires.
Well, I'm hoping it don't go too long, but if it do, we just gonna stand out here and fight.
It's a battle, one analyst says, that each side thinks is essential to their future. Can they find a middle ground somewhere down the road? Hendrik Sabrandi, CGTN, Detroit.
5 American prisoners have been reunited with their families after a prisoner swap deal between Iran and the United States, after their plane landed at a military base near Washington, D.C. The 5 were freed on Monday after the United States allowed Iran access to a $6 billion previously frozen because of sanctions. As part of the deal, 5 Iranians were also freed from jail in the US, but only 2 chose to return to Iran. ASEAN countries have begun their first ever joint military drills off the coast of Indonesia. The 5-day operation is aimed at developing maritime security and patrols, as well as practicing the distribution of humanitarian aid after a disaster. Indonesia says the drills are non-combat in nature. More than 10% of Japan's population is now aged 80 or older, according to new figures. The country has the world's oldest population and one of the lowest birth rates. The ageing demographic has led to labour shortages, sparking concerns over funding for pensions and healthcare. A Chinese drone company has become the first in the UK to be granted a licence for spraying and planting seeds on farms. Its co-founder has been visiting England's West Midlands to oversee the specialist training that's needed to operate them. Our correspondent Catherine Drew reports.
Witnessing takeoff for the first time in the UK. Justin Gong, co-founder of Chinese drone developer and manufacturer XAG, visiting Shropshire to see one of his latest drones in action. It comes as the Guangzhou-based company has won the first and so far only licence to spread and spray on farms from UK aviation authorities. Regulations for chemical spray are expected within months. Currently, there are 10 of these drones in the UK, but XAG estimates that number will rise to 1,000 within 3 years, making this a much more common sight in British farming. The UK development follows a PricewaterhouseCoopers report which said adoption of agricultural drones could save companies billions of dollars, cut tons of carbon and create 650,000 new jobs by 2030. It's a market XAG is eyeing as a gateway to Western Europe.
I think once we get into the UK market, the whole European market will be much easier for us to get into in the following years. UK, France, and Germany are big agriculture countries as well. So I think it's the right time we are in front of that big demand.
The drone operators are being trained by XAG's UK partner, the Agricultural University, Harper Adams. It's recently begun running a week-long course, a mandatory requirement in the UK before being allowed to buy a drone.
What we need is the confidence of the farmer, and when they see that this technology will work and will provide gains, then it will lead to even greater adoption of drone technology in the UK.
Some students say they've already seen a demand for drone services.
You go from these massive hulking beasts of tractor equipment and clogging up the roads and eating up diesel to going to do similar tasks, not the same tasks, but similar tasks with a battery-operated drone. The benefits are huge, yeah. And the demand, I believe, is huge now.
The university is looking for high-tech solutions to common agricultural issues, including labour shortages and climate change. Justin Gong ended his visit telling students and staff he hopes to share XAG's new solutions soon.
We want a farmer to run the robots, drones, and the AI just like how they run the traditional machinery. I cannot say too much about new technology because it's not released yet, but for the next generation of the robots, it's going to be smarter, more efficient, and more locally.
Catherine Drew, CGTN, Shropshire.
And finally, a mammoth 150-year-old banyan tree, scorched during last month's deadly wildfires on the Hawaiian island of Maui, is showing signs of new growth. The tree, which has been described as the heartbeat of Lahaina, was damaged but still standing after the fires, which killed nearly 100 people and reduced much of the historic town to ash. Since then, experts have volunteered to try and save the tree, and they say that fresh leaves sprouting from the branches are a positive sign of recovery. The headlines again. US President Joe Biden addresses the United Nations General Assembly as nearly 150 world leaders meet in New York for the annual global gathering. We're looking at live pictures of that now. The theme of this year's meeting is rebuilding trust and reigniting global solidarity. Climate change and the conflict in Ukraine is set to top the agenda. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky will speak later. Protesters in Libya's city of Derna take to the streets for the first time, angry at the government's failure over deadly floods that killed thousands of people. Demonstrators torched the home of the ousted mayor, calling for more accountability from the country's officials. And a row between India and Canada has escalated after Delhi expelled a Canadian diplomat in response to a similar action taken by Canada on Monday. This comes hours after India rejected an accusation by Ottawa that it was involved in the killing of a Sikh separatist leader in Canada. And that is The World Today. Thanks for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
News.